Welcome, friends. I'm Pat Franks. This is another edition of The Right Direction. It's somewhat understandable that people are reluctant to accept the miracles described in the Bible. The universe is such an orderly machine functioning with such precision that it's breathtaking, and anything that threatens to interrupt that orderliness, whether it's good or bad, can cause suspicion and concern or even fear. For example, it would be hard to convince anyone that tomorrow the sun would come up in the west. If it did, that would mean everything we ever knew about anything would be a challenge. The Bible believers are quick to say, well, God is God. He can do what he wants to do. He built the machine. He can reverse the machine. He can adjust the machine. He can annihilate it or duplicate it, whatever he wants to do. But a person with no relationship with God finds such a confession naive and simplistic, to say the least. We understand that, and we have some patience with that kind of a person who has honest doubts and concerns. However, when the minimalist just shouts that everything in the Bible is to be discounted and announces that the historical events never happened, or the people and the places that are named in its pages never existed, the kingdoms were all fictional, and the teachings that are in its pages were merely the ramblings and hallucinations of mad religious fanatics, then our challenge is intensified, to say the least, to have patience with that confession or that declaration. Here are a few objections you may have heard over the years. The story of Jonah and the whale. The objections were not really based on what you might think, that a person could survive such an ordeal and get up and go preach a revival in the city of Nineveh. No, the critics said that the city of Nineveh, the kingdom, never even existed in the first place. But now we know it did, and we know exactly where it was. It was on the banks of the Tigris River at a place now called Mosul in Iraq. And the stories of the little shepherd David, who built the great kingdom and united all of God's people, he never existed, they said. It was all put together for religious purposes. And then his name was dug up in an inscription in northern Israel, having been placed there by one of his enemies, or at least the enemy of his household and his descendants. And it was dug up. When they dug it up, they discovered it was written about 9 centuries before the birth of Christ. And Belshazzar, the man who saw the handwriting on the wall, that couldn't have been true, they said, because he never existed. His name didn't occur anywhere. And then they discovered in some cuneiform writings his name, declaring him to be the son and co-regent of his father, Nabonidus. And the record went on to state that he died after the Persians took over the city of Babylon. There was no exodus, some emphatically insisted. But even while they were raising their protests, there were others who were as equally opposed to the Bible, who were putting their objections in jeopardy. For example, in August of 2003, an expatriate group of Egyptians living in Switzerland filed a lawsuit against all the Jews of the world, demanding the restoration of the gold, the silver, the cooking utensils, and even the clothing taken from Egypt at the Exodus. The suit alleged that there was an estimated 300 tons of gold that were taken from Egypt that Passover night. And, well, believe it or not, that was not the first time such a case had come up. Over 2,000 years ago, that issue was raised before Alexander the Great. But it came to nothing as well. When the rabbis presented their defense, they also presented a bill for the labor of 600,000 men, Israelite slaves who had worked for 430 years in Egypt, and they thought that might offset the 300 tons of gold and the interest that the lawsuit had computed for 5,700 years. So I guess you would consider that situation in both of those time frames a draw. You may have heard me mention, if you've been around where we've been before, a man by the name of Adam Zertel. He was a disabled Israeli war veteran. He was an author, prolific author, and a professor, and an archaeologist. Adam Zerl found the original stone altar built by Joshua at the very beginning of the conquest of the land of Canaan. At first, he didn't understand the irregular shape of the courtyard that was built around that altar. It was almost 3 football fields long, but it was irregular. And with the use of some modern technology like drones, they were able to see better, and subsequently found that there were 5 other of these irregular shapes in the area close to the altar, but they were all in the shape of a human foot or a sandal. This altar and these footprints were built within 1 generation of the crossing of the Red Sea. Can you imagine that? The builders' fathers had been there on that Passover night, huddled up, listening to the wails of those Egyptian mothers crying for the death of their firstborn. They saw Pharaoh's armies as they were drowned in the midst of the Red Sea. Their fathers, their uncles, their aunts, and perhaps even some of their older siblings were witness to that event. They watched Moses come down off of that Mount Sinai carrying those tables of stone that had the handwriting of God right on them. And they had heard Moses say that when he was on that mountain, God had promised him every place that his foot would tread. Wow. Those man-made footprints were and are a testimony of that group of people's faith in God that had delivered them from Egyptian bondage. It was a declaration. We're going to follow him. He has left his footprint in the world, and we're determined to walk only where he walks. We will build our homes, our lives. We will worship in the path that he has left. We will raise our families. We will put together our relationships and earn our living. We will live our lives in the path, the trail that was left by Almighty God. Wow. You want to know why our country's in the condition that it's in? Families disintegrating, honest people suffering at the hands of the wicked, corruption permeating our society from the halls of government down to the street corner where you live, thieves ripping off the taxpayers, crooked politicians staying in position through the abuse of power, arrogant elitists getting rich off the backs of hard-working, good American people. I think I can tell you, we as a people have, for the most part, abandoned the principles revealed to those people who built that altar Adam Zerl found and who made those footprints, those giant footprints in the desert near Gilgal. Joshua chapter 1, the Lord gave them specific principles. Those are the ones I think we've ignored. This book that has been ignored, often maligned, often criticized, this book shall not depart out of your mouth. Meditate on it day and night. Do according to all that is written in it. Then you will prosper and you will have success. Seems pretty simple, doesn't it? We need to turn back to that path that God has made through the world. Be determined like those early Israelites. We're not going to stray from it from anything. That'd be the right direction, folks. God bless.